In today's video, we are back in France. In the court of Louis XIV, many women sought to attract the king's attention, and the king in turn enjoyed the company of many women, some for passing fling, and some for somewhat longer relationships. Some even became the king's official mistresses. The last woman in this long list of women was Madame de Maintenon, who became one of the most powerful figures at the court of Louis XIV. But, despite her influence, much about her early life remains a mystery, and what little that is known is nothing short of extraordinary. She was born in a prison, and in his youth, she made fateful decision that stunned the Paris society. Today, we will peek into her background and early days. Madame de Maintenon's childhood was far from the life of privilege she later enjoyed. Born Françoise d'Aubigné, her early years were marked by extreme hardship. To understand Madame de Maintenon, we need to go back to her family history. She was born Françoise d'Aubigné. Françoise's grandfather was a man named Agrippa d'Aubigné. Agrippa was a prominent figure in the court of King Henri IV, Louis XIV's grandfather. Agrippa was a staunch Huguenot, but he managed to survive the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, largely because he avoided being in Paris at the time. Later, when Henri IV was held hostage in the Louvre, Agrippa became one of his most trusted followers. He fought bravely in numerous battles, leading Protestant forces against Catholic armies. Despite his strict religious principles, which occasionally put him at odds with Henri IV, the two men shared a deep mutual respect and saved each other's lives on several occasions. But the two eventually severed their ties completely. This was because Henri IV converted to Catholicism. He made this decision to unite the country and become the King of France. But, from Agrippa's point of view, it was merely a betrayal. Many comrades had died for their religion, and Henri's act was seen as a betrayal to them. Agrippa, who was a man who did not know compromise, could not forgive Henri. So he led a rebel force against him, eventually fleeing to Geneva in exile, where he spent his days in the wilderness. During his exile, he began to write poetry in earnest, something he had done occasionally before. His poems contained deep insights into human nature and life. He also wrote poems that satirized the atrocities committed by the Catholic forces during the Civil War, and the corruption of the French court. While Agrippa was in exile, his son, Constant, grew up at the family estate in Maillezais. He was a somewhat timid youth, probably because he grew up under the strict control of his overbearing father. He attended Sedan Academy according to his father's wishes. Sedan Academy was one of the top schools in France at the time. It was founded to train Huguenot pastors, and not only it provided high-level education, but also taught a strict Calvinist lifestyle. But, unfortunately, the strict Calvinist lifestyle was not in line with Constant's temperament. He felt oppressed. After school, Constant worked as an administrator in his region, and married a wealthy widow named Anne Marchand. The couple did not get along well. He felt his wife was dominating and controlling, constantly interfering with every detail of his life. So, one day, when he was in his early 30s, he finally had enough. He quit his job, and declared that he was no longer a Huguenot. He retreated to his estate, and indulged in a lifestyle of debauchery, as if he was determined to experience everything he had been forbidden to do all his life. No one could stop him. His relationship with his wife naturally deteriorated. And one day, his wife was found brutally murdered. It turned out that his wife also had a lover while he was indulging in this lifestyle, and when his wife and her lover were together at an inn, an assassin broke in, killed them, and fled. Since an extramarital affair was involved, the husband, Constant, became a prime suspect. He was investigated, but he had a perfect alibi. He was released, but many people still believed that the intelligent and eloquent Constant was behind it. At the time, he was 34 years old. A few years later, he married a young girl named Jeanne de Cardillac, but little is known about her background. Some say she was the daughter of a prison warden. The story goes that Constang met her while he was in prison and seduced her. They got married and had 2 sons. But not long after, Constang ended up in prison again. At the time, he had become acquainted with a few Englishmen, who turned out to be spies sent by the Duke of Buckingham. He got involved in their schemes and was arrested on charges of espionage. Espionage was considered a serious crime, so it was not something he could easily wriggle out of. His life was in danger. To reduce his sentence and secure his release, Constang reportedly revealed everything he had heard from his English friends, including a crucial piece of intelligence. He shared that the Duke of Buckingham was planning to dispatch a large fleet to save La Rochelle. This information was of great importance to Cardinal Richelieu, who was in the process of besieging La Rochelle. Some say this was the reason Constang managed to escape the death penalty. The problem was that this news reached his father, Agrippa. Agrippa was already feeling ashamed of his son's debauched lifestyle, and then, when Agrippa heard that his son had betrayed crucial information that endangered the Protestants in La Rochelle, he finally erupted in fury. His pent-up anger from years of embarrassment came to the surface. He disowned his son and confiscated the estate that Constang had been using, and cut off all financial support. This left Constang's wife, Jean, and their 2 sons in a dire situation. At the time, Jean was pregnant with their 3rd child. With nowhere to go, Jean went to the prison where her husband was incarcerated. Apparently, back then, there was a system that, if a head of the family was imprisoned, his family could come live with him in the prison. So, Jean moved into the prison with her husband, where she gave birth to a child named Françoise d'Aubigné. Françoise was baptized as a Catholic, according to her mother's wishes. Her father didn't care, since he had already denounced Protestant belief anyways. They eventually left the prison, with the help of acquaintances, but they couldn't escape poverty. In 1639, Constang was pardoned and released, but he could no longer stay in France. So, he took his family and moved to the French island colony of Martinique in the Caribbean. They began a new life in this unfamiliar land, but things didn't go as planned. At one point, he was appointed governor of a small island, which delighted him, but when he arrived, he found that it was practically a deserted island. Worse still, it was frequently raided by native tribes who pillaged and killed. After enduring years of hardship, the family returned to France. The father came back first, trying to find work opportunities related to Martinique, but he suddenly passed away. The mother, who had suffered greatly due to marrying the wrong man, and eventually had to scrape by with her children in poverty, followed him shortly after. It seems that despair and malnutrition had ruined her health. The 3 siblings were suddenly orphaned, and at that time, Françoise was not even 12 years old. The person who took them in was their aunt, Madame de Maintenon. Even before they had left for Martinique, she had cared for them for a month, when they had nowhere else to go. Madame de Maintenon was a wealthy woman, and a devout Protestant. She made sure her niece and nephews received good education, and tried to raise them as devout Protestant. Back when Françoise was born and baptized, she had a godmother, and this godmother's mother was the Countess of Noyang, who was a prominent figure at court. The Countess was a devout Catholic, and when she heard that François was being raised as a Protestant, she couldn't stand the idea that her daughter's goddaughter was growing up a Huguenot. So she decided to intervene. So, essentially, the 2 families, one Huguenot and one Catholic, engaged in a battle over the young Françoise. The Countess of Noyang won this battle, and Françoise's life changed dramatically. She took Françoise away and placed her in a convent to receive a Catholic education. Françoise disliked her time at the convent. The strict restrictions and the low quality of the education frustrated her. But there was one nun, Sister Celeste, whom she deeply admired, and Françoise found solace in her company. Meanwhile, Françoise blossomed into a beautiful young woman. The Countess of Noyang, noticing this change, decided the time had come. She took Françoise out of the convent, and began to take her to various social gatherings. With her tanned skin and a slight exotic air that reminded people of the West Indies natives, Françoise earned the nickname the Pretty Indian. Her unique appearance made her a favorite in social circles, where she was seen as an adorable oddity. During this time, Françoise met a poet, one of the era's finest satirists, known for his biting commentary on society, Paul Scarron. Scarron was of noble family, but suffered from a severe disability. He had contracted chronic spinal tuberculosis after a playful dip in icy water during a winter carnival, and this disease left his body horribly twisted. His spine and neck became rigid, his legs were paralyzed, and his head was tilted to one side. He had to hunch over with his knees drawn to his stomach, and he lived much of his life in a wheelchair. Françoise felt great compassion for Scarron, who was 25 years older than her. She was very kind to him, and the two grew close, exchanging letters frequently. In these letters, Françoise found Scarron to be wise and humorous. Gradually, she opened up to him, sharing her worries and seeking his advice. Over time, she began to rely on him more and more. At the time, Françoise was torn between two options, which were either entering a convent or finding a good man to marry. However, both choices were difficult for her, as she had no money. Even entering a convent required a significant donation, which she did not have. Marriage was also challenging without a dowry. She thought no one would want to marry a person like her who has no dowry. Besides, she wasn't interested in anyone she had met so far. She poured out her dilemma to Scarron, and sought his advice. So Scarron asked her what kind of man she liked. And Françoise replied that she liked someone like Scarron. She may have just meant she liked men who are wise and trustworthy, but this response left Scarron feeling a bit odd and excited all at the same time. After pondering about her reply for a few days, Scarron met with Françoise. There, he made a surprising proposal. He told her he could help her in one of two ways. He could provide the money she needed to enter the convent, or she could marry him, and no dowry would be necessary. This was a clever and considerate offer of help, and a propose all rolled into one that Françoise could reject him without declining his help altogether. Françoise, somewhat taken aback, said she would think it over. After a few days, she gave him her answer. She decided she will not be entering the convent. This, of course, meant she accepted his marriage proposal. This was in 1652. When the news broke that Scarron and Françoise were getting married, Paris was in an uproar. Scarron was a famous poet, and Françoise, known as the Pretty Indian, was also well known in the social circles. But no one had thought the two would get married, especially because Scarron was a disabled man, and Françoise a young beauty. Even Anne d'Autriche, the Queen Mother, who was an ardent fan of Scarron, was shocked by the news, and is said to have wrote to him saying, "I hope that you will be happy, but I doubt it." Due to this marriage, Françoise became a subject of curiosity. People wondered what kind of woman would marry a man like Scarron. But she quickly made friends with the influential figures who frequented Scarron's salon. Scarron being a famous poet, his salon attracted the most fashionable and witty people of Paris, including notable figures like Madame de Lafayette and Madame de Sévigné. It was through these gatherings that Françoise became close friends with another young woman, Françoise Athena de Rochechouart, who would later become the Marquise de Montespan. The two women, both named Françoise, formed a strong bond. Françoise Athena was known for her lively, bold, and assertive nature. She spoke freely, often with sharp wit, and had a knack for sarcastic remarks and satire. However, she sometimes lacked refinement, and would make careless or tactless comments. On the other hand, Françoise d'Aubigné, or Madame Scarron, was the complete opposite. She was reserved, quiet, and carried herself with grace. And Montespan admired Madame Scarron's virtues, and wanted to embody some of her graceful qualities. In a way, Françoise became a sort of role model for Montespan. In 1660, Scarron died at the age of 50. He left behind no wealth, only considerable debts due to his extravagant spending. The Queen Mother, Anne d'Autriche, took pity on Scarron's widow and provided her with a pension, allowing her to get by. But when Anne d'Autriche passed away in 1666, the pension was cut off, leaving Françoise in a difficult financial position once again. At this point, it was Françoise Athena who came to her aid. Athena, who was gaining favor of King Louis XIV, used her influence to have Françoise's pension reinstated. This act of kindness helped solidify the bond between the two women. Soon after, Athena became the king's main mistress. And in 1669, Athena gave birth to King Louis's daughter, and quickly became pregnant again. Because the children were born out of wedlock, they could not be brought up in the palace, and Athena needed to find a governess for the children to take care of them. Being a governess of the royal children is not a simple job. The position involved managing every aspect of the royal children's household. The governess would be responsible for not only teaching the children, but also overseeing servants, nannies, and even guards. She had to manage the household budget and take care of all domestic matters. It was a role that required considerable trust and competence, far from something that could be given to just anyone. And Athena immediately thought of Madame Scarron. She trusted Françoise's abilities to manage the children's affairs, and thought it would be more enjoyable and reassuring to have her friend around as their governess. So, in 1669, Françoise d'Aubigné, now Madame Scarron, became the governess for Montespan's children. Inevitably, she crossed paths with their father, King Louis XIV. However, at first, the king did not like Françoise at all. What was it about Françoise that displeased him? And what would happen between Françoise, King Louis, and Madame de Montespan? We will find out in our next video. So please like and subscribe to continue receiving our stories from history. It really helps a small, fledgling channel like us